You know that feeling, right? You've poured your energy, time, maybe even a few sleepless nights into something you really care about.
Yeah.
Getting that project done, launching that thing, studying for that crucial exam. You've done everything you can, and now you're just kind of waiting.
And that waiting comes with anxiety, doesn't it? What's the outcome going to be? Was it enough?
Exactly. That intense focus on the result, that feeling that, everything hinges on the outcome.
It's such a fundamental part of how we approach goals now. Very modern world feeling.
It really is. And it can feel paralyzing sometimes, which is why this deep dive feels so, well, timely, even though the wisdom is ancient. We're looking at a concept that goes back thousands of years, articulated most famously, I think, in a verse from the Bhagavad Gita.
Right. The idea of performing actions without being fixated on the results.
Precisely. That's what we're unpacking today.
And we're drawing insights from interpretations of that core Bhagavad Gita verse.
Yeah.
But also bringing in wisdom from the Manu Smriti, the Ayurveda, and the Upanishad, all based on the material you shared.
Yeah, our mission really is to cut straight to the heart of this principle, understand what these ancient texts really mean by it, why they emphasize it so strongly.
And explore how this perspective might just offer a different way to navigate the pressures and, the uncertainties we all face today.
Definitely. Let's jump in.
Okay, so let's start with that central statement from the Bhagavad Gita. The verse is, Karmanivadikaraste mafalokadachana.
The one everyone seems to quote, right? Often summarized as, action is your right, not the fruits. What's the precise translation according to our source material?
The direct interpretation given is, your right is only in performing actions, not in the fruit.
Okay. At first glance, that can sound a bit strange, can't it? Like, you shouldn't care about goals at all.
It can, yeah. But the text gives a really clear reason for this perspective.
And the reason is basically that the fruit, the outcome, isn't entirely within our control anyway. Is that it?
Exactly that. The result, the foul, isn't solely a product of the effort you're putting in right now.
Okay.
The source material highlights a key factor. Past karmas are also added to the fruit.
Past karmas, meaning like actions from previous lives or just earlier actions in this life?
It could encompass both, yeah. The idea is there's this cumulative effect of actions influencing the conditions and outcomes you encounter now.
Ah, so there are forces, these accumulated influences, already sort of baked in, shaping the final result, independent of just my present effort.
Precisely. And because of that complexity, the text suggests that worrying excessively about the result is, well, ultimately unproductive. It's like trying to control a dice roll when, some numbers have already been weighted by previous turns. Your power lies in the act of rolling.
Not forcing a specific number. Got it. Okay. Focus on the action, the input, because the outcome is a mix of your present effort and these other factors you can't directly control right now.
You've got it.
But this doesn't mean you just become passive, right? Sit back and do nothing. These texts seem to place a huge emphasis on doing.
Oh, absolutely. They really do. In fact, the necessity of action is considered fundamental to existence itself.
Wow.
The source connects this idea to a mantra from both the Ayurveda and the Upanishad. Kurvan eveha karmanchi jivyetsatasamma.
That sounds pretty significant. What's the core message there?
It translates roughly to, by performing action in this world, one should wish to live 100 years.
Okay.
And the interpretation of the source is quite strong. Life is intrinsically linked to action. It even states, one who does not want to do karma has no right to live.
Whoa. That's a powerful statement. That existence itself is tied to performing actions.
It really underscores that action isn't optional. It's like essential to being alive.
Okay. But if we must act, and action usually implies working towards something, how do we square that with the idea of not being attached to the fruit? Doesn't having a goal naturally mean desiring an outcome?
That is a crucial point, yeah. And the source material clarifies this common misunderstanding head-on.
Good.
The verse is not advocating for aimless, purposeless activity. It explicitly says, here, the verse is not saying to start doing something without any purpose.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, even basic survival involves acting with purpose. You need food, shelter.
Exactly. Even animals act with purpose to fulfill needs. So intelligent human action naturally involves an objective.
Right.
The source introduces this concept of kamana,
Kamana.
Yeah, which is the desire or wish for the action itself, or maybe the immediate intrinsic objective of that action.
Like the desire to learn when you're studying, or the desire to build something when you're working on a project, or maybe the desire to compete if you're in a sport.
Yes, exactly like that.
Yeah.
And drawing from the Manu Smriti, the text adds even more nuance here.
Okay.
It says, while excessive craving for results, which it calls kamadamata, is discouraged,
Right.
a complete lack of desire, avayashakamata, isn't recommended either. The quote is clear. Excessive craving for results is not praiseworthy, nor is a complete absence of desire.
So it's not about being indifferent or like totally apathetic. You can still have goals and intentions. You should have intentions.
Absolutely. Having an objective is natural and necessary. The source gives examples. The student desires to pass. The businessman desires profit. The soldier desires to fulfill their duty.
Okay.
Even Vedic studies, it says, are motivated by desire. Kamana sehai vidadigam. The principle isn't against having a goal, it's against something else.
Okay, so if having a purpose or a goal, the kamana, isn't the problem, what is the real issue these texts are pointing to with mophaleo kadachana not in the fruit?
Here's where it gets really interesting and I think very applicable day to day. The core meaning of not in the fruit is about the absence of asakti.
Asakti. Okay, I've heard that term before in this context. What does it mean specifically in this source material?
Asakti translates to attachment. But it's more than just, wanting something. It's the excessive attachment, the clinging, the deep psychological investment in that specific outcome, the fruit of your action.
Okay, excessive attachment.
And according to the source, this is the direct cause of suffering, disappointment, and even despair.
And the examples the source uses to illustrate this, they're pretty stark, aren't they?
They are, sadly. The text points to really tragic outcomes, like students committing suicide after failing exams, or businessmen after a devastating financial loss, or politicians after losing elections.
Wow.
The source connects these directly, stating they commit suicide. This is the result of attachment.
That really drives home the potential consequence of that kind of clinging, that asakti. So it's not the ambition itself or the goal, but the sheer intensity of the psychological and emotional investment in getting that one specific result. That's what causes such pain if it doesn't happen.
Precisely. Having an objective, the kamana, is fine. But when your happiness, your identity, your entire sense of success or failure becomes completely fused with achieving a particular external outcome, that's asakti. And that dependence makes you incredibly vulnerable to the unpredictability of results. Think about that crushing feeling after a job interview you felt sure you nailed.
Oh, yeah.
Or the massive disappointment when a creative project you poured yourself into doesn't get the reception you'd hoped for.
Definitely felt that.
The source suggests that painful feeling comes from the same root, tying our internal state way too tightly to external outcomes we don't fully control.
That connection makes it feel very relevant, very grounded in daily life.
Okay.
Okay, so focus on the action, have a purpose, kamana, but avoid excessive attachment, asakti, to the result. How does this principle then tie into the idea of duty?
It's deeply intertwined. Performing action without attachment to the fruit is intrinsically linked to the concept of kartavya, duty.
Kartavya.
The ideal isn't to force yourself begrudgingly, but for doing your duty to become your natural, intrinsic nature. Like, as fundamental as breathing.
Like it's just what you do because it's the right action in itself, not because of what you hope to get from it.
Exactly. The source suggests let this become our nature. It's a totally different motivation than acting just for praise or some external reward.
Okay.
The example given is quite illustrative. It's about reporting an honest act, like finding and returning a lost wallet.
Right.
If that becomes big news or something you expect recognition for, it actually highlights how far we might have drifted from the idea that honesty is simply our duty. The source says honesty is our duty, full stop.
That example makes it very clear. It shouldn't be extraordinary, something needing a reward. It should just be the baseline, the natural state. But is it about doing any action as duty? I mean, criminals perform actions too, presumably with some purpose.
That's a critical distinction the source makes. It's not merely about action, any action. It's about the nature of the action. Is it righteous? Is it appropriate?
Okay, so how do we know?
The source states how to perform actions, the Veda has told. This points towards a framework, principles that define what constitutes right action versus wrong action.
And where do those principles come from in these texts? What's the foundation?
They're often rooted in a broader worldview, a sense of the sacred or interconnectedness. The source brings in a key verse from the Isha Upanishad here. Ishvasya sarvam.
Which translates to?
Roughly, all this, whatever exists in this changing universe, is enveloped by God. Or the divine, if you prefer.
Okay.
Therefore, enjoy with renunciation. Do not covet the wealth of anyone.
Enjoy with renunciation. So use things, experience things, but don't cling possessively.
That's the interpretation given. Everything ultimately belongs to the divine. We're essentially using what has been created or provided by God. We're temporary caretakers, you could say.
Right. We don't truly own it in an ultimate sense.
Exactly. And this mindset, using things with renunciation, not being greedily attached and not coveting what others possess it, naturally leads to a different way of acting.
How so?
You're less driven by personal greed or the need to accumulate things at the expense of others. Your actions can become more selfless, flowing from recognizing this shared reality under a divine principle. It shifts the focus.
That perspective shift feels like a very direct way to undercut Asakti, that excessive attachment. So how does faith or this sense of the divine explicitly connect to overcoming attachment to results?
The source makes that link very, very clear. Overcoming attachment, Asakti, is directly tied to faith in Ishvara, or God.
Okay.
The concept of Ishvara Prahan, which means surrender to God, is presented as absolutely essential for this principle of non-attachment to truly take root.
Surrender, but that sounds passive. Does it mean giving up effort?
No, absolutely not passive in that sense. It's an active orientation of your effort. The source advises, do your work and leave the fruit to God.
Ah.
It also emphasizes, perform actions, considering that everything belongs to God.
So, you bring your absolute best effort, you perform your duties as righteously as you can, and then you consciously place the outcome in the hands of a higher power, trusting it will unfold according to a larger design, maybe.
That's the essence of it, according to the source material, yes. It suggests that genuine belief in Ishvara isn't just intellectual, it's demonstrated through your actions. And this perspective, this surrender, fosters selfless action. It helps dissolve those negative qualities fueled by attachment, things like lust, anger, greed, delusion, ego, envy.
Because your focus shifts away from personal gain or loss.
Exactly. The source directly states, only when there is a feeling of surrender towards God will there be no attachment to the fruit. It's presented as the key.
Okay. This specific way of acting, focusing on the deed, not clinging to the specific outcome, rooted in duty and potentially this idea of surrender, it has a particular name, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
This practice of performing actions without desire for the specific fruit, without Asakti, is called Nishkam Karma.
Nishkam Karma. Action without craving for the result. And the alternative, what's that called?
The alternative is Sakam Karma. That's action performed with a strong desire and attachment to a particular outcome.
Sakam Karma versus Nishkam Karma, got it.
And the source material presents a really profound consequence tied to these two modes of action. It's quite fundamental.
Which is?
It makes a powerful statement. Karma itself is the cause of our bondage and liberation.
Wow. That's a huge claim. So action isn't just something you do, it's the very force that either ties you down or sets you free, depending on how you do it.
Exactly. Sakam Karma, driven by Asakti, that anxious clinging to desired results, leads to bondage. It ties you to the cycle of being elated when you get what you want and crushed when you don't.
You're bound by those external outcomes.
Precisely. But Nishkam Karma action, performed as duty, selflessly, without that intense attachment, and ideally with that sense of surrender that leads to liberation, to mukti, freedom.
And the source points to figures who actually lived this ideal as examples.
Yes. It cites Yogeshwar Lord Krishna himself, who delivered the Gita, and Maryada Purushottam Lord Rama. They're presented as prime examples of great karma yogis.
Meaning?
Meaning they performed immense actions, world-changing actions, for the welfare of the world, fulfilling their divine duties, but without personal attachment to the outcomes. They embodied this principle of Nishkam Karma.
Okay, let's just step back for a moment and try to summarize what this deep dive into these ancient texts really gives us.
Well, I think it provides a really powerful reframing of our relationship with effort and outcome, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It directs our energy towards the action, the part we can control.
Right, while acknowledging that the final result is complex. It's influenced by more than just our immediate work, including those accumulated past actions, the whole web of karma.
And it clearly distinguishes between having a purpose for action, the kamana, which is seen as necessary and natural,
and that excessive attachment to a specific outcome, asakti, which is pinpointed as the root of suffering and despair.
Definitely. And it elevates the concept of duty kartavya, making it an intrinsic motivation, not just something you do for reward.
And it suggests that righteous action is guided by deeper principles, like recognizing a divine connection or a sense of universal interconnectedness, seeing the bigger picture.
And finally, it presents faith, this idea of surrender, Ishvara pradhan, and selfless action, Nishkam Karma, as the path to actually dissolving that destructive attachment.
It makes that really profound assertion. How we act with or without this attachment is the very force that determines whether we experience bondage or liberation, freedom or suffering.
You know, these aren't just dusty philosophical ideas, are they? They speak so directly to the modern anxiety around performance, the pressure to get specific results.
Totally. And the search for meaningful engagement in our work and lives today, beyond just hitting targets.
They really do. And I guess it leaves us, and maybe you listening, with something pretty fundamental to consider. If, as these sources suggest, our own actions are the cause of both being bound and becoming free, and liberation comes from performing selfless action without attachment, what does this ancient perspective change about how you approach your daily duties, your goals, and those deep aspirations you hold?